Today we're very privileged to have Christine Abbott address us, talking about intertwingling, the role of action learning in collaboration. Now, Christine's a co-founder of the UK Centre for Action Learning Facilitation and co-author of Facilitating Action Learning, a Practitioner's Guide. Based in East Yorkshire in the UK, she's an experienced action learning facilitator and developer with a background in HR and National Health Service and social care. So, and also recently my teacher, which is always a privilege to hear from the hear from the mentor. Okay, and so without further ado, I'll hand over to Christine. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Yes, I've got very fond memories of sitting up all night in front of the wood burner in my lounge, working with you and Jen and Bob and Christine and others. So yeah, very fond memories of that. So I'm just going to share my screen and see if this this is going to work. Slideshow. It should work. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you today about intertwingling and perhaps what that means for action learning in particular, moving forward. And we're going to sort of have a little bit of I hope, a conversation rather than me just sort of presenting. I'll give some ideas out, and then it'll be really interesting to hear from the rest of you. And hopefully it'll fit in with the theme of the conference. So I thought I'd start off. T.S. Eliot's one of my favourite poets. I thought I'd start off with a T.S. Eliot poem, which I think really resonates, perhaps with this conference. So, where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we've lost in information? What is life? Have you that is not community? When the stranger said, "What is the meaning of this city? Do you huddle close together because you love each other?" What will you answer? We all dwell together to make money from each other? Or this is a community? Oh, my soul, be prepared for the coming of the stranger. Be prepared for him who knows how to ask questions. So today is going to be for me, or this evening for me, where I am in the UK, is going to be about what questions do we need to ask for the future. So intertwingling, it's an adjective. It was invented by Nelson, probably related particularly in the early days to technology. But it means to be connected together in a deep and a complex way. So we're going to look at 4 stances of collaboration as we move through, going from the egocentric to the ecocentric. So going from doing things well to doing things better, to doing things better together, and then doing things with the world that actually matter to it. Of course, collaboration isn't a really new thing. There's always been a lot of collaboration in the world, generally between organisations that's transactional, customers to organisations, suppliers, partners. And I'm really happy that we have a very strong collaboration relationship with BALT and Jen and her team. It's one that means a great deal to me, and it makes me feel as though we're doing things better. And in fact, we even doing better things together by sharing ideas and collaborating with each other. So just to remind us a little bit about where the stance 1 before we get into action learning. So stance 1 is doing things well. The collaboration is usually between the person and the author of a procedure or a process or a task. The answers are there. They're in instructions or recipes. So you go to them. You do have a relationship with the author or the instructor, but it tends to be a very transactional relationship. where action learning comes in. And of course, action learning, as those of you that know action learning, know that it started as a Quaker practice that drew on communal wisdom to address the problems of life, based on the clearness committees that Quakers hold dear. And some of the general principles that Reg Revens drew from that were about starting from ignorance, from acknowledging inadequacy, and I'm certainly going to be doing that when it comes to stance 4, being honest about yourself, being committed to action and not just thought, to act in a spirit of friendship, and for doing good, not just for or in, but with the world. So that lovely quote from the Buddha, which was quoted in Revens, to do a little good is better than writing a difficult book. So for Reg, it was very much about encouraging people to help themselves and urging us to do that for people who perhaps couldn't do it for themselves. And it was founded upon a really uncompromising moral philosophy about how to be and how to act. So as we move through the stanzas, we can see where action learning comes into play. So the next one, about doing things better, action learning being used in systematic inquiry, being used in service improvement, being used in professional practice improvement. So we know that, for example, most of my work, as Bill perhaps hinted in his introduction, with my background, comes from working with social workers, coming from working with humanitarian aid organisations and health workers, where we bring them together to learn how they could perhaps do things together. And we do that through action learning. And I know BALT are really successful in bringing organisations together for that purpose too, and working with organisations in terms of business and service improvement. So it's very social centric. Then if we move on to stance 3, this is where you would hope action learning might be at the moment. So it's working together with people, perhaps different stakeholders. So examples of stance 3 might be things like, for example, let's think, I worked a little while ago with an organisation in the UK that wanted to do a project about looked after children. So they could have just got together social workers and had an action learning set in stance 2, which was about improving what they did. But instead of doing that, they decided, and I worked with them on this, that it was quite complex and quite difficult, but we brought together children who were looked after, their foster parents, social workers, agencies that provide foster carers, and people who had been fostered or looked after in the past. So we had action learning sets that were made up of all of those people together. So they could work together, they could look at the relationships between them and work across boundaries to think about ways in which they might work in a way that collaborated together in order to do things better together. And I know that, again, BALT have done similar work with organisations in Australia and Tasmania. One of the examples I'm working with at the moment is actually in Styria, where they're looking at transport, and they've got the airports, bus services, rail services, car transport, both private and cabs together, and they're looking at how they could develop a more sustainable means of transport. So they're working together. We've got some really good examples, of course, with COVID, the way that people are now working together, you know, Google and Apple coming together to share in terms of creating track and trace for your mobile phone. Another good example there would be action learning sets actually that incorporated Formula One teams and medical device teams and academics, where within 100 hours they developed a better way of using CPAP machines for people with COVID. Another example of an organisation who's working in that way is Race Against Dementia, which I know has been recently launched in Australia with Sir Jackie Stewart. And they're bringing together, again, Formula One people together with medical people, together with actually performance coaches to work together across the boundaries. So that sort of idea that you move forward from doing things or improving things to actually doing things better by working together across different communities. So where do we go from here? And this is where the really interesting thing is, how do you take it? And is there such a thing as stands for? So how do we move from seeing the world as an aggregate of individual entities who perhaps have no common interests and no stake either in the planet or each other's survival? So some of the things that we've been looking at and exploring, a whole group of us, is thinking about, well, if we today, because the world is so complex, and because we need to do things not just better for us, but also, and better for our organisations, but actually for the world, then is it more than just problem solving? Is it more about equal and truthful and sincere exchanges and ways of organising that are even more truly collaborative? So we started to look at some of the things that are around at the moment that might help us. One of those was modern evolutionary biology, which I found absolutely fascinating when I read it. Bearing in mind, I failed my O-level exams when I was at school in biology. I still found it very interesting. And where it talks about how life is evolving by a process of diversification and integration of diversity through collaboration. So moving away from the survival of the fittest to the focus of it's the dynamic interactions and relationships that happen that actually create a collective survival. So more important than competition. The key strategy then becomes creating conditions to optimize the system as a whole, rather than only maximizing it for one or two, and often in society, the detriment of many. So we sort of think, well, actually, maybe we could learn something from modern evolutionary biology. The other area that we've looked at is spirituality. And that can raise some eyebrows sometimes, and often in my experience, when you talk about spirituality in organisations, people think that you're either daft or worse. And yet, if we go back, certainly in the UK, if we go back to the 18th and 19th century, actually a lot of Quaker organisations, really, their organisations thrived on love and spirituality. A lot of that's been taken over by the developed Western economic world and model, which tried to exclude all of that. But if you look back at people like Cadbury and Rowntree, the chocolate people, Fry's was another one, where they built houses for workers. They had the first HR departments. They call them, you know, the sort of the work, helping the workers in their work. So they were philanthropic. They had a real view about how they all lived together in a communal sense. A lot of the regional banks, people like Barclays and Lloyds, where actually they've now been swallowed up by multinationals, but they were actually about good ways of economics and good ways of lending. The Pease Company, which actually pioneered the first railways, was also a Quaker business. So this idea that it went on to a Quaker business method, which of course action learning has come out of, but this idea that it's separate from the world that we live in, our spiritual selves. And of course, I know that you've had either you've got a session or you've had a session. I'm completely confused with time zones. With Aboriginal elder in this conference, you know, the old wisdom, the ancient wisdom. The same is true in China when you look at Confucianism. So there's a sense of, you know, this sort of deep spirituality that we all have, and how that comes out in organizations. And out of that, we do get some long-standing examples as well of cooperatives and employer ownership schemes, mutual and credit unions, all working in a collaborative way. So what can we learn from that? One of the other things that we looked at was social ecology. And it presents ecological problems that we're facing as rising mainly from social problems. So it really links the social beings with ecology. And it talks about the hierarchy and domination, and how radical political ecology based on communalism rather than a capitalist system of production and consumption is part of the thinking. And what can we learn from that? Certainly they link very much the sustainability agenda with the racial justice movements and an oppression of some peoples. So thinking about, you know, what could we learn from that today, even though some of this work is 50 or 60 years old. And then we come to post-humanism, and this is where I struggled quite a lot. I sort of heard this term and I've sort of struggled with the whole idea of it. And there's lots of different routes to post-humanism. But basically, for me, it comes down to the fact that, or not the fact, but the idea that we no longer see humans as the only entity that really matters to the world, and therefore has priority over everything else. So from this view, animals, plants, minerals also have rights and deserve to be listened to or considered equally to the human being. And some seem to consider, reading a lot about this, that those other entities, including rocks and minerals, of course, have their own form of consciousness, and that if we ignore their feelings, they actually fight back, and we get famines and pandemics and floods and fires, and it's that kingdom that are trying to fight back against the humans. So there's some really quite interesting debates happening in the world that seem to suggest that the way that we live is not a competitive struggle, but a cooperative dance. And the focus is on networks and patterns in movement. So what does that say for action learning, and where is it? And is it about doing things with the world that really matter to it? And we've called this ecocentric. So it focuses on all forms of eco, so social justice, equality, integrity, peace, sustainability. It's beyond sustainability to regeneration. And it's working for the planet, not for profit, where profit and cost effectiveness remain important. They're also just a means to an end, not the end itself. What does that say for leadership? Is it a collective, a social process? What does it say for how we actually manage and organize our world? And we do see some things that have been emerging. And again, I noticed that BALT, and I know Genevieve is very, very keen on circular economy, and working with that movement. There's also the fair shares movement in the UK. The economy for the common good, mainly based in Austria and Europe, things like restorative practice, eco-leadership, and also there's something that's starting to come out from the Economy for the Common Good in Austria that we've been working a lot on, is the Eco Scorecard, which will be published in English fairly shortly. So those sorts of ideas about how you can work in that way. And interestingly, with the project in Styria in Austria, the airport has decided, and perhaps this is Stansford, the airport, through its collaboration with other transport hubs, have started to think about whether or not the damage that air travel and air cargo transport is so great that the best thing for them to do is actually close down. And so they're looking at how they can create a different economy. So some really interesting sort of debates that are happening about, you know, what place has action learning got in this? What questions do we ask to the world that matter? And how do we become more collaborative? So I thought that maybe, and this is going to rely on Jen's expertise here, is perhaps we could go into some groups, or participants, people here could go into some groups and just think about maybe one of those questions, not necessarily all of them, but just for 10 minutes or so. And I'm trying to keep my eye on the time, Jen, as to how long we've got, but to think about either what questions does the world want us to ask, what questions would your community need to ask in order to develop a more of a culture of collaboration, and what questions would help organisations get ready for this sort of work. And if the groups can nominate one person just to record the questions, not the debate, just all the questions that they think would be useful in an action learning way. And then what we'll do, I would suggest, is then when we come back to the main room in 10 minutes, those are all put in the chat box, or you can email, I'll put an email address for you as well, email them, and I'll collate them all and I'll put them back into, and I'll share that back with Jen so that she can share those out with all of you. So Jen, is that okay?
Yep.
With you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're ready to go.
Well, I know we haven't got time to sort of carry on the conversation, but as I say, we'll if we can save that chat, Jen.
Yep.
And then I'll pull it all together. If you send it to me, then I'll pull it all together.
Right.
Okay. So what you might want to do individually, and just thinking about it, you know, what questions can I ask myself about the unique gifts that I have to do things with the world that matter. So it's something to sort of think about. And I know you've got some electronic like notebooks, haven't you? So it may be something to just reflect on in terms of your own experience. And you know, what could I do? What gifts have I got that could help with this important work that's happening in the world.
Thanks.
Yeah. So just, you know, thinking about, well, what can I do with this? You know, where's it going to be, and what do we do next? So this idea, we are starting from ignorance because we're starting to think about, and when I say we, I'm talking about Tom, who I work with a lot, and we've been having conversations about it, people like Mike Pedler and others. We're starting to think about, you know, there's stance 1, 2 and 3 has been around for a long time, and it sort of stopped at stance 3, but now we're starting to think, well, what would stance 4 look like? And of course, you know, things like COVID, who would have known a year ago when we were talking about this conference, how much COVID would actually take over the world, just this tiny virus. And I think somebody said if you got all the virus together, it would weigh less than a butterfly's wing.
Wow.
And yet it's actually dominating all of our lives and has changed our lives so much. And actually pushed some things along, hasn't it? It's pushed the agenda in a particular way. People are thinking about things that they'd not thought about before. And that goes to social things as well. You know, we're very well aware that children who live in poverty don't have access to the computers, therefore their education is suffering. People who live in one-bedroom flats in central London, for example, you know,
Yeah,
they
I
don't
thought
have the exercise and the space. So we know people of Black and ethnic groups are often adversely affected by COVID, or they're more adversely affected by COVID, in that we're seeing more deaths from in those groups than we are from the BAME community than we are from other groups. What's that about? You know, there's a lot of research to think about, well, what does that mean? So there's a lot of sort of inequalities in the world that have just come from, and lots of things being highlighted from this little virus. And we don't know all the answers. So I'm very aware that my time is now is almost up. So I just thought I'd finish with another piece of writing. This time from 1903. Interesting, it was written so long ago. But I think it perhaps fits what we've just been talking about. So have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and do try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a foreign language. Don't search for the answers which couldn't be given to you now because you would not be able to live with them. The point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then someday in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. And please feel free to contact either myself or Tom.
Yes, I'm here, so you can see me.
Hooray! He's coming right at the last minute. Well done, Tom.
No, I was in the breakout. It was great.
Oh,
Good chat.
excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
it was excellent. Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to add anything, Tom?
No, not really. I think it's really, I did get in a bit late, but I really enjoyed it. And I think it's really important, this stands for and all that. And, well, if we don't do something about it, we're done for. So it's quite important anyway. And I enjoyed the chat. And in our chat, the post-human was quite, I don't know if popular is the word, but featured, which made me very happy. Yeah.
We have a question from the floor. Can you just remind everyone where the idea of stances came from? Is there a reference that you can provide?
Came from me.
Ah,
I can email you some sources if you like.
that would be great, and I can share them with you, Melissa.
Yeah, one or two journals and a bit of a book. Yeah.
We could probably take a couple of minutes if there's anyone got some other questions from the floor.
I don't know, this is not a question really, but just reflecting on the last piece that you read, Christine, and perhaps we're already working our way into, or living our way into the answer. We just don't realise it yet.
Yeah.
But if you look at the impact of the COVID-19 virus on emissions and change of activities and so on. And I think you said earlier, maybe the rocks are going to fight back. Well, maybe that's what COVID is. And we're already learning, we're in the process of learning that. I think the whole COVID thing has been a gigantic action learning set, really. And it's been very interesting, the experimentation that's been taking place in different parts of the world and different strategies and what works and what doesn't is all action learning, really.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bob. I think the impact of this and the way that we live our lives, and even just seeing. I mean, I noticed certainly in the first lockdown, going for walks and seeing how much brighter the flowers were and how much clearer the sky was, and we saw in Venice, you know, that people could actually see through the murky waters of the canals. You know, all of those things, we are seeing the difference. The harvest this year, my apple tree has never had so many apples on it. You know, those sorts of things, we sort of seeing the effect of the changes already.
Okay. Gone nearly 10 minutes overtime there, so we've eaten into our comfort break. But what we'll want to do is just finish up there. But I'm sure Christine and Tom will take questions in if we've put them in the chat, or you've got the email contacts there. But just like to, on behalf of the organising committee, thank Christine and Tom, especially Christine, for the presentation and the thoughtful questions. I think everyone got some really good conversations happening out of that, and really good thinking for some of us. It's very early in the morning. So
I'm afraid, yeah, it's one of those presentations that you really need with a bottle of wine and an evening, don't you?
Yeah, maybe we might. Some of us might kick that on later on. But thanks very much, Christine.